The Appalachian Matriarch of Madness, a tale so disturbing it defies comprehension, yet unfolded quietly in the shadow of America's mountains for decades. In the remote hollows of eastern Kentucky, where mist clings to the hillsides like forgotten secrets, the Blackburn family lived removed from society's watchful eyes for generations. This is the haunting chronicle of Eleanor Blackburn, a woman who, between 1923 and 1968, orchestrated one of America's most disturbing cases of familial unions, creating a lineage marked by profound physical and cognitive challenges. Our investigation begins in 1974, when authorities were called to a dilapidated homestead nestled deep in an unnamed hollow near the Kentucky-West Virginia border. What local Sheriff Thomas Whitley discovered that autumn day would haunt him until his dying breath. The property, accessible only by a winding dirt road that disappeared into dense woodland, housed 17 individuals, all related by blood in ways that defied natural family structures. When we arrived, we knew something wasn't right, Whitley recalled in his 1982 memoir. The silence was what struck me first. You'd expect children to be running around, but there was this eerie stillness. Then they started coming out of the house, one by one, and I realized we'd stumbled onto something, Unnatural. The Blackburn compound revealed a family lineage deliberately cultivated in isolation over 5 decades. At its center was Eleanor Blackburn, born in 1902, who by age 72 had created what one social worker would later describe as a kingdom of her own making. With subjects born to serve her twisted vision, Eleanor's story began conventionally enough. Historical records show she was the daughter of coal miners who settled in the region during the late 1800s. After losing both parents to influenza in 1918, the 16-year-old Eleanor inherited the remote property. She married her first cousin, James Blackburn, in 1920, a practice not uncommon in isolated mountain communities of that era, though certainly not endorsed by broader society. What distinguished the Blackburns from other cases of cousin marriages was Eleanor's calculated determination to create what she called the purest family line in America. County records recovered from the courthouse in nearby Pikeville revealed that Eleanor gave birth to 8 children between 1921 and 1935. What those clinical documents couldn't convey was her emerging ideology. Former neighbor Mabel Hawkins, interviewed in 1975, recalled Eleanor's unsettling pronouncements. She'd say that mixing bloodlines weakened families, that the outside world was corrupting God's plan. She started refusing to let her children attend school, saying they'd be contaminated by lesser stock. We all thought she was just eccentric, but nobody realized what was actually happening up in that hollow. By the early 1940s, Eleanor had withdrawn her family entirely from community life. The eldest children reached maturity without any substantial contact with the outside world. Then, the family stopped appearing altogether. For almost 30 years, the Blackburns existed as little more than local legend, occasionally glimpsed from a distance, but effectively removed from society. What happened during those decades of isolation would only be pieced together after authorities discovered the compound in 1974. Medical records and interviews with the few cognitively capable family members revealed that Eleanor had systematically orchestrated unions between her children and later, between her grandchildren and their own relatives. Dr. Harold Jenkins, who examined several Blackburn family members in 1975, noted the genetic consequences were precisely what modern medicine would predict. Recessive traits became dominant. Physical abnormalities appeared with increasing severity in each subsequent generation. Cognitive development was profoundly affected. The third generation displayed particularly severe manifestations. The most disturbing aspect of the Blackburn case wasn't merely the practice of consanguinity, but Eleanor's deliberate orchestration of it. Journals recovered from the property revealed her twisted, pseudoscientific beliefs and determination to purify her lineage, a perverse echo of eugenics theories that had been thoroughly discredited decades earlier. She kept meticulous records, explained forensic psychologist Dr. Sarah Williams in a 1976 academic paper. She tracked physical traits, abilities, and characteristics as if she were conducting a scientific experiment with her own descendants as subjects. The notation system she developed suggests she was selectively encouraging certain pairings based on traits she deemed desirable. Check if you're already subscribed to this channel. The dark secrets of these isolated family histories reveal truths about human nature that mainstream history often overlooks. Subscribe now to uncover more hidden chapters of America's forbidden past. By the mid-1950s, Eleanor Blackburn's experiment had entered its second generation. Her original 8 children had produced 23 offspring through various intrafamilial relations. Eleanor, now in her 50s, ruled over the compound with absolute authority, determining every aspect of daily life from food distribution to sleeping arrangements. Most significantly, she controlled reproductive pairings within her growing clan. Social isolation was the cornerstone of Eleanor's control. The family compound, expanded over decades to include 5 rudimentary structures clustered around the original homestead, was situated nearly 12 miles from the nearest neighbor. A hand-painted sign at the property entrance warned, "Trespassers will be shot on sight." Few locals ventured near enough to test whether this was an empty threat. The physical environment of the Blackburn compound reflected the family's degenerating condition. Investigators in 1974 documented dwellings with dirt floors, no running water, and minimal electricity supplied by a generator used sparingly. What little furniture existed was handmade and crude. The family subsisted primarily on a small garden plot, livestock, and wild game hunted in the surrounding forest. The conditions were primitive, noted social worker Margaret Collins in her case report, but more concerning was the family's complete lack of awareness that their living situation was abnormal. They had no frame of reference for how other people lived. Several younger members had never seen an automobile or a television. Eleanor's indoctrination methods emerged. Through interviews with more verbal family members, she maintained control through a combination of religious extremism, physical discipline, and psychological manipulation. She positioned herself as both matriarch and spiritual leader, creating a belief system that justified familial unions as God's chosen path for her lineage. "She told us the outside world was filled with evil," explained Thomas Blackburn, one of Eleanor's grandchildren who demonstrated higher cognitive function than many of his relatives. "She said we were special, chosen to keep our bloodline pure. Anyone who questioned her was punished severely." The genetic consequences of Eleanor's multi-generational experiment manifested with increasing severity. Medical examinations of family members in 1975 documented a range of conditions: skeletal malformations, cardiovascular abnormalities, reduced immunity, and significantly compromised cognitive development. The third generation, Eleanor's great-grandchildren, exhibited particularly pronounced physical characteristics, with several unable to walk or communicate verbally. Dr. Richard Thornton, a geneticist who studied the Blackburn case, explained, "Consanguineous mating dramatically increases the likelihood that harmful recessive genes will be expressed." What we observed in the Blackburn family was a textbook demonstration of this principle, but at a scale rarely documented in modern medical literature. Perhaps most chilling were Eleanor's journals from the 1960s, which revealed her awareness of the declining health of her descendants. Rather than reconsidering her practices, she doubled down, writing, "The weakness showing in some lines is necessary purging. The strongest will emerge purified through the trials of flesh." Eleanor's control was not merely reproductive but extended to every aspect of family life. She determined which children would receive rudimentary education taught by herself using outdated materials from the 1920s, which would be assigned to labor, and which would be kept hidden away in the back rooms of the compound, those with the most severe manifestations of genetic abnormalities. By 1965, the family had evolved its own dialect, a modified English with unique grammatical structures and vocabulary that further complicated their potential integration with outside society. They developed distinctive cultural practices, including seasonal rituals and a hierarchical social structure that placed Eleanor at its apex, followed by her first-generation children, with subsequent generations assigned decreasing status. Former Sheriff Whitley recalled the difficulty in communicating with family members during the 1974 intervention. "They spoke English, but it was like they were using words differently. They had names for things that made no sense to us. The younger ones especially seemed to struggle understanding basic questions." The question that haunted investigators was how such a situation could persist undetected for decades. The answer lay partly in the geography of Appalachia, its remote hollows and cultural tradition of privacy, but also in systematic failure of social systems. School attendance records showed that concerns about the Blackburn children's absence were raised in 1943, but wartime resource limitations prevented follow-up. A public health nurse noted concerns after a rare encounter with family members in 1951, but her report was filed away without action. The Blackburns fell through every possible crack in the system, concluded a 1976 congressional investigation into the case. Their isolation was both geographic and institutional. In many ways, they existed in a 19th century bubble that our modern infrastructure never penetrated as the outside world progressed. Through civil rights movements, space exploration, and cultural revolution, the Blackburn Hollow remained frozen in a distorted version of the past, one increasingly shaped by Eleanor's deteriorating mental state and the biological consequences of her eugenics experiment. By the late 1960s, the Blackburn family compound had grown to house nearly 30 individuals spanning 4 generations, all descendants of Eleanor. The third and fourth generations displayed increasingly severe manifestations of genetic disorders. Medical records from 1975 documented that 70% of the youngest Blackburns suffered from profound developmental delays, while 85% exhibited visible physical abnormalities, statistics that geneticists described as unprecedented in modern medical literature, the catalyst for the families. Discovery came in September 1974 when Jacob Blackburn, Eleanor's grandson, managed to escape the compound. At 27 years old, Jacob had been assigned perimeter security duties. One of the few family members permitted limited contact with the outer boundaries of their property. During a hunting expedition, he deliberately separated from his uncles and walked 18 miles through rugged terrain to reach the town of Pikeville. He appeared at the sheriff's office, barely able to stand, recalled Deputy Samuel Harrison. His clothing was handmade from animal skins and rough cloth. His speech was nearly incomprehensible. But what struck me most was his expression, like someone seeing the world for the first time. Jacob's attempted integration into outside society proved traumatic. Having never experienced electricity, automobiles, or modern medicine, he responded with terror to the sheriff department's fluorescent lighting and radio communications. Only through the patient intervention of a local church volunteer, Martha Collins, did Jacob gradually communicate his story. At first, we thought he was suffering from severe mental illness, Collins explained in a 1976 interview. It took days to understand that his perceptions and behaviors weren't the result of psychosis, but of complete isolation from modern society. He didn't know what a photograph was. He couldn't recognize himself in a mirror. Jacob's testimony revealed the most disturbing chapter of the Blackburn saga, Eleanor's transition from family matriarch to self-proclaimed deity. In her 70s, Eleanor had developed an elaborate belief system, positioning herself as a divine vessel, creating a new human lineage. She required daily rituals of devotion and maintained control through a combination of physical punishment and reward systems. Dr. Williams, who interviewed Jacob extensively, noted, he described Eleanor sitting on a makeshift throne constructed from animal bones and wood, issuing proclamations about bloodlines and purity. She had convinced the family that the outside world had been destroyed in a great catastrophe, and only those of pure Blackburn blood had survived. When authorities finally reached the compound on October 3, 1974, they discovered Eleanor had died approximately 3 months earlier. Without her controlling influence, the family structure had begun to disintegrate. The eldest surviving son, William Blackburn, had attempted to assume leadership but lacked his mother's psychological hold over the family. What authorities witnessed at the compound defied their expectations. Despite the primitive living conditions, the family had developed complex social structures and division of labor. They practiced subsistence agriculture with techniques dating back to the early 1900s. They manufactured clothing from animal hides and homespun cloth. They treated illnesses with herbal remedies passed down through generations, many of which later analysis would reveal contained legitimate medicinal properties. The most heartbreaking aspect was the condition of the youngest generation. Children born between 1965 and 1973 displayed severe physical deformities and cognitive impairments. Medical examinations revealed conditions including polydactyly, extra fingers or toes, facial asymmetry, cardiovascular defects, and compromised immune systems. Many were unable to speak or care for their basic needs. If you've felt the chill of this dark chapter in American history, type the mountains, keep their secrets in the comments below. Eleanor Blackburn would have wanted her story silenced forever. Your comment defies the code of silence that protected her reign for decades. The intervention team, comprised of law enforcement, social services, and medical professionals, faced unprecedented challenges. No established protocols existed for integrating a multi-generational isolated family into modern society. The Blackburns' unique dialect required specialized translators. Their fear of outsiders and unfamiliar technology prompted several escape attempts in the initial days. Most challenging was determining appropriate care for family members. Those with severe conditions required immediate medical intervention, while others needed psychological support to process their sudden exposure to modern society. The eldest generation, having known a different life before Eleanor's isolation mandate, demonstrated the greatest potential for adaptation, though decades of indoctrination had left deep psychological scars. It wasn't simply a matter of removing them from bad conditions, explained Dr. Jenkins. The compound was the only home they'd ever known. Their family structure, despite its profound dysfunction, provided their sole framework for understanding the world. Separation, even into better physical circumstances, represented another trauma. The Blackburn case sparked national debate about social services in rural America. Congressional hearings in 1976 examined how a family could remain so completely isolated in modern America. Policy reforms followed, including improved rural school attendance monitoring and public health outreach programs for remote communities. For the Blackburns themselves, integration proved a complex, uneven process. The youngest children, placed in specialized care facilities, made the most significant adaptational progress. Adult family members with moderate cognitive function were eventually resettled in supervised group homes. Those with the most severe impairments required permanent institutional care, their conditions representing the most tragic legacy of Eleanor's experiment. Genetic testing, still in its infancy during the 1970s, confirmed what clinicians had observed. The Blackburn family exhibited one of the highest recorded coefficients of inbreeding in medical literature. The family's genetic material would later contribute significantly to scientific understanding of recessive genetic disorders, though this use raised profound ethical questions. Jacob Blackburn, whose escape initiated the family's discoveries, struggled with his role in exposing the only community he had ever known. In a rare 1983 interview, he reflected, "Sometimes I wonder if I did right. Not because life was good there, it wasn't, but because none of us were prepared for this world. We went from one kind of suffering to another." The dismantling of the Blackburn compound in late 1974 marked the beginning of what would become one of the most complex cases in American social services history. The property itself, deemed uninhabitable by modern standards, was eventually condemned. Physical evidence, Eleanor's journals, family photographs, handcrafted artifacts, was preserved for both the criminal investigation and subsequent academic study. The criminal dimension of the Blackburn case presented unprecedented legal challenges. Eleanor, the primary architect of the family's isolation and inbreeding practices, had died before authorities intervened. Her surviving adult children, themselves products of her indoctrination, occupied a gray area between perpetrators and victims. Prosecutors struggled to determine culpability in a situation where generations had known no alternative to their isolated existence. "The legal framework wasn't designed for something like this," explained Commonwealth Attorney Richard Davis in 1976. "These weren't individuals who had chosen to break societal norms. They had never been exposed to those norms in the first place. Their understanding of acceptable family structure had been completely formed within Eleanor's distorted worldview." Ultimately, no criminal charges were filed against any Blackburn family members. Instead, the case proceeded through family court with the focus on protective services rather than punishment. This decision proved controversial, with some community members arguing that adult participants should be held accountable regardless of their upbringing. The medical response to the Blackburn family spanned multiple institutions across Kentucky and neighboring states. The University of Kentucky Medical Center established a specialized unit for the most severely affected children. The Eastern State Hospital integrated adult family members requiring psychiatric support. Private facilities throughout the region accommodated those with moderate needs. Dr. Margaret Fuller, who coordinated medical services, described the unprecedented nature of the situation. "We were essentially creating protocols as we went. There was no existing roadmap for the rehabilitation of individuals from such profound isolation, complicated by severe genetic disorders. Every small success, a child learning to use a fork, an adult communicating with staff, represented a significant victory." The genetic legacy of the Blackburns became a subject of intensive scientific study, with the family's multi-generational inbreeding thoroughly documented through Eleanor's records. Researchers gained unprecedented insight into the expression of recessive genetic traits. The Blackburn study, published in the American Journal of Human Genetics in 1980, remains a landmark in understanding consanguinity effects. What makes the Blackburn case scientifically significant is the controlled nature of the family environment, explained geneticist Dr. Elizabeth Chun. Unlike other historical cases of isolated genetic populations, We have Eleanor's detailed records documenting exactly who paired with whom across multiple generations. Combined with modern genetic analysis, this allowed us to trace specific traits and disorders to their genetic origins with remarkable precision. The psychological dimensions of the case proved equally significant. The Blackburn family exhibited what clinicians termed cultural familial isolation syndrome, a complex of behaviors resulting from complete separation from societal norms. Family members demonstrated extreme difficulty with abstract concepts, limited emotional expression, and profound attachment to specific objects and routines from their former life. Most family members struggled with the concept of individual identity. Having existed in a communal structure where personal choice was virtually non-existent, the youngest generation, who had known nothing but the compound, experienced particular difficulty differentiating themselves from their relatives. Several children exhibited prolonged distress when separated, even briefly, from siblings or parents. Social worker James Patterson, who worked with Blackburn family members for over a decade, noted, "Their concept of self was fundamentally different from what we consider normal. They understood themselves primarily as components of a collective rather than as individuals with distinct rights and identities, helping them develop personal boundaries and autonomous decision-making was among our greatest challenges." Public reaction to the Blackburn case evolved over time. Initial media coverage in 1975 focused on the sensational aspects, with headlines emphasizing the mountain monsters and inbred clan angles. This approach prompted backlash from medical professionals and ethics advocates, who argued that such characterizations further dehumanized already vulnerable individuals. By 1977, more nuanced reporting emerged, examining the social and institutional failures that allowed the situation to develop unchecked. Pulitzer-winning investigative series by the Louisville Courier-Journal traced decades of missed opportunities for intervention, including unanswered reports from concerned hunters who had glimpsed family members in the forest and ignored complaints about strange sounds emanating from the hollow at night. Perhaps most disturbing were the connections investigators discovered between Eleanor Blackburn's ideology and broader historical movements. Her journals revealed influence from early 20th century eugenics literature, materials she likely encountered before her family's complete isolation. The perverted logic she developed, justifying intrafamilial unions as purification, borrowed language from discredited scientific theories that had once been mainstream in American academia. Eleanor didn't develop these ideas in a vacuum, explained historian Dr. Robert Lawson. Her writings show clear influence from eugenics pamphlets circulated in rural communities during the 1920s. She essentially took these already problematic theories to their most extreme conclusion, applying them within her isolated family system where no external voices could counter her interpretation. By 1980, the immediate crisis had resolved into long-term management. Of the 29 Blackburn family members discovered in 1974, 22 remained in various forms of supervised care. 5 had achieved sufficient independence to live in community settings with minimal support. 2 had died from complications related to congenital conditions. The financial cost of the Blackburn case reached into millions of dollars, prompting legislative debate about resource allocation. Conservative lawmakers questioned the extensive expenditure on a single family, while advocates argued that the situation represented a collective societal failure deserving comprehensive response. Beyond the immediate family, the case raised uncomfortable questions about isolated communities throughout Appalachia. Public health surveys conducted between 1976 and 1979 identified several other families in remote areas living with limited outside contact, though none approaching the extremity of the Blackburns. These findings prompted expanded outreach programs targeting geographic isolation. The Blackburn Hollow itself became the subject of local superstition. Despite official condemnation, the property remained untouched, with few willing to purchase land associated with such disturbing history. By 1983, nature had begun reclaiming the structures, vines creeping over the remains of Eleanor's kingdom. Nearly 50 years after authorities discovered the Blackburn family compound, the case continues to resonate through American medicine, social services, and cultural understanding. The legacy of Eleanor's experiment extends far beyond the hollow where it unfolded, influencing institutional practices and academic research in ways she could never have anticipated. The surviving Blackburn family members, now elderly, have followed dramatically different life trajectories. Thomas Blackburn, who demonstrated the highest cognitive function among his generation, eventually completed a modified high school education and worked as a groundskeeper at Eastern State Hospital until his retirement in 2012. In rare public comments, He described his journey as learning to be human in the outside world. Jacob, whose escape initiated the family's discovery, struggled with integration. After multiple attempts at independent living, he returned to a supported housing program in 1986, where he remained until his passing in 2008. His medical records noted persistent nightmares about Eleanor and the compound, suggesting he never fully escaped the psychological impact of his upbringing. The youngest generation of Blackburns, those born in the final years of Eleanor's reign, experienced the most intensive interventions, with appropriate medical care, nutritional support, and developmental therapy. Several achieved milestones initially thought impossible. 2 learned to communicate through adapted sign language, and 1 eventually mastered basic reading skills. Accomplishments that specialists attributed to early intervention, counteracting both environmental deprivation and genetic challenges. In medical literature, the Blackburn phenomenon refers to the documented recovery potential of children removed from severely deprived environments. The case demonstrated that even individuals with significant genetic complications could achieve developmental progress when provided appropriate support, a finding that challenged determinist perspectives on inherited conditions. Dr. Fuller, who followed the family until her retirement in 2001, reflected, "What we learned from the Blackburn children fundamentally changed how we approach developmental disabilities. Their progress, while limited by genetic factors, far exceeded initial projections. It demonstrated that environmental enrichment can partially compensate for even severe genetic disadvantages." The genetic samples preserved from the Blackburn family have continued to yield scientific insights. As DNA sequencing technology advanced through the 1990s and 2000s, researchers identified specific mutations concentrated in the family lineage. Several previously unclassified genetic disorders were first characterized through study of Blackburn family members, including Blackburn syndrome, a complex of cardiac and skeletal abnormalities now recognized in medical literature. Perhaps more significant than the scientific contributions were the policy reforms sparked by the case. The Blackburn Protocol became shorthand in social services for comprehensive multi-agency response to isolated families. Rural school districts implemented improved absence monitoring systems. Public health departments developed outreach programs specifically targeting geographic isolation. Child Protective Services expanded definitions of endangerment to include deliberate isolation from societal resources. The psychological study of the Blackburns contributed significantly to understanding familial indoctrination and cult dynamics. Eleanor's methods, combining isolation, religious manipulation, information control, and physical dependency, mirrored techniques documented in destructive cults, though applied exclusively within a family context. Her journals, studied by researchers at Johns Hopkins University, revealed sophisticated psychological manipulation belying her limited formal education. Eleanor intuitively understood principles of mind control that cults typically develop over generations, explained Dr. Williams in her 1992 book on the case. She created a closed information system where her word was the only authority. Physical isolation reinforced psychological dependence, and family members monitored each other's compliance. The effectiveness of her methods is evident in how completely she controlled multiple generations. The cultural impact of the Blackburn case emerged more gradually, initially sensationalized in tabloids. The story eventually inspired more thoughtful examination of Appalachian isolation and the region's relationship with the broader American society. Documentary filmmakers, playwrights, and novelists explored the case with increasing nuance, examining the social conditions that allowed such extreme separation to persist undetected. Ethical debates surrounding the Blackburn case continue in academic circles. Questions about genetic privacy, consent for scientific study, and the balance between individual autonomy and protection remain unresolved. The family's genetic material, collected before modern informed consent protocols were established, continues to inform research, a situation that raises complex questions about generational justice and medical ethics. For the communities surrounding the Blackburn Hollow, the case prompted difficult self-examination. Local historian James McClintock observed, "The region had to confront uncomfortable truths about how neighbors could remain so completely unaware of what was happening just miles away. It challenged Appalachian traditions of privacy and non-interference, forcing a reconsideration of when isolation crosses into neglect." The physical remnants of the Blackburn compound have largely disappeared, reclaimed by the forest that once concealed them. In 1995, a small memorial was established at the County Historical Society. commemorating the family members who lived and died in isolation. The plaque bears no photographs, only names and a simple inscription. May their suffering not be forgotten, and may such isolation never again go unnoticed. Eleanor Blackburn herself remains an enigmatic figure, a woman whose distorted vision created generations of suffering. Psychological profiles suggest she likely suffered from paranoid personality disorder exacerbated by geographic isolation and limited education. Her journals reveal a mind progressively detaching from reality, constructing elaborate justifications for behaviors she must, at some level, have recognized as harmful. The most disturbing aspect of Eleanor's writings is their internal consistency, noted psychiatrist Dr. Thomas Reynolds in 2005. She created a completely coherent alternate reality with its own logic and moral framework. This wasn't chaotic delusion, but methodical. Organized thinking proceeding from profoundly flawed premises to their logical, if horrifying, conclusions. The Blackburn case stands as a stark reminder of human vulnerability, how completely a family can fall outside society's protective systems, how profoundly children can be shaped by their earliest environments, and how persistent the consequences of isolation can be across generations. It underscores the vital importance of community connections and institutional vigilance in protecting the most vulnerable. If you've watched until here, it's because you appreciate these profound historical investigations. Leave a comment saying I watched until the end, so I can know who truly values these deep explorations of America's hidden past. Please subscribe to our channel, give this video a thumbs up, and share it with others who appreciate uncovering the forgotten corners of history. Your support allows us to continue bringing these important stories to light. As time passes and the Blackburn name fades from public memory, the lessons of their isolation retain their relevance. In an increasingly connected world, the possibility of such complete separation seems increasingly remote, yet pockets of extreme isolation persist even in modern America. The Blackburn legacy serves as both warning and call to action, a reminder that what happens beyond society's view remains our collective responsibility. The story of the Appalachian Matriarch and her descendants ultimately transcends sensationalism, offering profound insights into human resilience, the consequences of isolation, and society's obligation to its most vulnerable members. It stands as testament to both the damage one individual can inflict across generations and the remarkable capacity of the human spirit to seek healing, even from the darkest of beginnings.